She grew up believing family was supposed to feel safe, stable, and quietly supportive. Instead, the house felt crowded but emotionally empty, filled with expectations and comparisons. Conversations were transactional, focused on what she lacked rather than who she was becoming. Affection appeared only when she complied, when her choices aligned with what others preferred. Any deviation from that invisible script was met with silence, disappointment, or subtle ridicule. No one shouted, no one slammed doors, which somehow made the neglect harder to name. She learned early that pain delivered calmly is often dismissed as misunderstanding. Birthdays passed with polite gestures, never with genuine interest in her inner world. Her presence was tolerated, not celebrated, like furniture nobody thought to replace. And slowly, she began to accept that this version of love might be all there was. She tried to earn warmth through achievement, hoping success would unlock belonging. Grades, responsibilities, favors, and sacrifices became her currency for attention. Each effort bought temporary approval, quickly withdrawn once expectations shifted again. Mistakes were remembered longer than accomplishments, replayed whenever authority was needed. She felt constantly evaluated, never understood, like a project perpetually under revision. Family gatherings became performances where she played the role assigned without protest. Expressing discomfort only reinforced the idea that she was ungrateful or dramatic. So she learned to minimize herself, smoothing edges to avoid friction. The cost was invisible at first, paid quietly through swallowed words and forced smiles. Over time, the silence inside her grew louder than any argument could have been. What hurt most was not rejection, but the absence of curiosity about her feelings. No one asked how she was coping, only why she was not doing better. Support was conditional, tied to obedience rather than empathy or trust. She watched siblings receive patience she was never offered without explanation. Attempts to discuss the imbalance were met with denial or subtle gaslighting. They insisted nothing was wrong, that she was imagining distance where none existed. Yet loneliness persisted, even when surrounded by people sharing her last name. She began questioning her own perceptions, wondering if the problem was her sensitivity. That doubt slowly eroded her confidence, replacing instinct with constant self-surveillance. Feeling unseen became her normal, a background hum she stopped trying to silence. At night, she replayed conversations, searching for moments where she could have tried harder. She blamed timing, tone, even her own existence for the emotional disconnect. The idea that family could fail her felt disloyal, almost forbidden to consider. So she internalized the rejection, converting it into shame and quiet resignation. If love required disappearing, she reasoned, then disappearing was a reasonable price. No one noticed her retreat, which confirmed the lesson she had already learned. Absence did not disrupt the household rhythm in any meaningful way. That realization settled heavily, reshaping how she understood her place in the world. She was not missed when quiet, not sought when distant, not protected when vulnerable. And this unspoken truth marked the beginning of a much deeper fracture. The distance became more obvious as she grew older and needed guidance more than approval. Life presented decisions that required support, not judgment or silent evaluation. When she hesitated or struggled, advice arrived wrapped in criticism instead of care. They framed her confusion as weakness, her questions as inconvenience. Help was offered only after reminding her how much effort it required from them. Gratitude was expected immediately, even when assistance felt transactional and cold. She learned that needing people made her indebted in ways she could never fully repay. Independence was praised publicly, but punished privately when it reduced their control. Every step toward autonomy triggered subtle reminders of her supposed limitations. Support was never about her growth, but about preserving a hierarchy she never agreed to. As conflicts accumulated, communication shifted from passive distance to quiet avoidance. Messages went unanswered longer, calls returned with visible reluctance. When she visited, conversations stayed superficial, carefully avoiding anything meaningful. Her attempts at honesty were met with discomfort, followed by topic changes. They preferred harmony over truth, even when harmony demanded her silence. She began to understand that peace in that family required someone to carry the weight, and that someone had always been her, without formal agreement or recognition. Responsibility settled on her shoulders, while authority remained elsewhere. The imbalance drained her energy, leaving little room for self-trust. She felt increasingly isolated, even while doing everything expected of her role. Moments of crisis revealed the depth of the abandonment more clearly than words. When she needed reassurance, they minimized the severity of her pain. When she needed presence, they offered distance disguised as advice. Statements like, "You'll be fine," replaced actual involvement or concern. They assumed resilience where vulnerability was quietly breaking her apart. She realized that being strong had become an excuse for their absence. Her capacity to endure removed any urgency to protect her. The stronger she appeared, the less they felt responsible for showing up. Strength became a trap, admired from afar but never supported up close. This realization left her feeling exposed rather than empowered. Eventually, she stopped reaching out with the same hope she once carried. Expectations lowered, not out of maturity, but out of emotional self-defense. She prepared for disappointment before every interaction, softening the impact in advance. Conversations felt rehearsed, stripped of spontaneity or genuine connection. She measured her words carefully, avoiding topics that might reveal too much. The relationship shifted from family to obligation, maintained out of habit. Love was no longer something she felt, only something she remembered wanting. The grief was subtle, unfolding slowly rather than arriving all at once. She mourned people who were still alive, present but unreachable. And this quiet mourning deepened the wound that had already formed. Without steady support, her decisions became shaped by urgency rather than intention. She chased validation in places that felt welcoming, even when the cost was high. Opportunities promising belonging distracted her from recognizing subtle exploitation. She accepted roles and relationships that mirrored familiar patterns of conditional approval. If attention was offered briefly, she worked harder to keep it from disappearing. Boundaries blurred as she confused tolerance with loyalty and sacrifice with love. Each compromise felt small alone, but together they redirected her entire trajectory. She told herself this was growth. That struggle proved resilience and independence. But deep down, she sensed she was repeating lessons she never chose to learn. The absence of guidance left her navigating adulthood through trial and quiet regret. Work became another arena where she overextended herself to feel valued. She stayed late, accepted unfair criticism, and absorbed responsibility without authority. Praise was rare, but the possibility of earning it kept her compliant. She equated exhaustion with worth, believing effort could replace support. When burnout surfaced, she dismissed it as weakness rather than warning. Rest felt undeserved, indulgent, something she had not earned yet. The same family narrative followed her into professional spaces unchecked. She internalized the belief that survival required constant proving. Stability remained elusive, always just beyond the next sacrifice. Her life became reactive, driven by avoidance of rejection rather than pursuit of meaning. Personal relationships reflected similar imbalances, quietly reinforcing her isolation. She attracted people drawn to her reliability, not her emotional needs. Being needed felt safer than being known, so she leaned into usefulness. When she expressed discomfort, it was often minimized or redirected. She stayed longer than she should have, hoping effort would inspire reciprocity. Leaving felt like failure, another confirmation that she was difficult to keep. So she adapted again, adjusting expectations downward to preserve connection. Over time, disappointment felt familiar, almost predictable. The cycle repeated with different faces, each time eroding her trust further. She wondered if fulfillment was something other people learned, but she never did. Eventually, the accumulation of misaligned choices reached a breaking point. The life she built no longer resembled the future she once imagined. Fatigue became constant, not physical alone, but deeply emotional. She felt disconnected from her own desires, unsure what she genuinely wanted. Reflection brought discomfort, forcing her to confront how far she had drifted. The realization was sobering. She had been surviving, not living. Every path she chose was shaped by fear of abandonment, and that fear had quietly governed her decisions for years. This awareness did not bring relief, only clarity that something had to change. Hitting this low marked the true beginning of her fall. The breaking point did not arrive as a single dramatic event, but as quiet exhaustion. She woke up each day already tired, carrying a weight she could not name. Small decisions felt overwhelming, as if every choice carried permanent consequences. She noticed how often fear guided her reactions before reason could intervene. Saying yes felt safer than risking disapproval, even when it cost her peace. She avoided conflict instinctively, associating disagreement with abandonment. Over time, her world narrowed to whatever felt least likely to collapse. Dreams became optional, postponed indefinitely for the sake of stability. She told herself this was maturity, not loss, responsibility rather than resignation. But something essential was quietly slipping away from her awareness. Financial pressure intensified the sense of being trapped inside her own life. She accepted situations that drained her because uncertainty felt more dangerous. Risk seemed irresponsible when she had never been offered a safety net. Mistakes felt catastrophic, amplified by the absence of emotional backup. She carried every consequence alone, without reassurance or shared burden. This isolation sharpened her anxiety, making failure feel permanent and personal. She compared herself constantly to others who appeared more supported. Their confidence felt unfair, built on foundations she never received. The comparison fed resentment she refused to acknowledge openly. Instead, she turned that frustration inward, where it quietly multiplied. The family distance remained unchanged, but its impact grew more corrosive. She stopped expecting help, yet still felt the sting of its absence. When major decisions arose, she hesitated, lacking internal permission to choose freely. Their voices echoed in her mind, questioning her judgment before she acted. Even in silence, their influence shaped her sense of capability. She realized how deeply their doubt had embedded itself into her thinking. Autonomy felt theoretical, something discussed but rarely practiced. Every step forward triggered an instinctive urge to seek validation. Without it, she second-guessed progress and magnified setbacks. Her independence existed in function, not in confidence. One evening, the realization surfaced with unsettling clarity. No one was coming to correct this trajectory or rescue her from it. Waiting had become a habit, not a strategy. She saw how survival mode had quietly replaced intention. Life was happening to her, shaped by avoidance rather than desire. The recognition was painful, stripping away comforting illusions. Yet it also revealed a hard truth she could no longer ignore. Continuing this way meant living a life defined by other people's absence. The fall was complete, not because she failed, but because she finally saw it. And that awareness marked the lowest point before any real change could begin. She did not announce the change because it began too quietly to explain. The first shift was internal, a refusal to keep negotiating her own worth. She stopped asking what would be accepted and started asking what felt true. Discomfort surfaced immediately, unfamiliar and sharp without old coping habits. Guilt followed, trained into her whenever she prioritized herself. Instead of retreating, she stayed present with those feelings until they softened. She noticed how often fear had spoken on behalf of others. Naming that pattern weakened its authority over her decisions. For the first time, silence felt like space rather than punishment. That subtle difference altered how she moved through each day. She began making choices without rehearsing explanations in advance. Some were small, almost unnoticeable to anyone else observing from outside. Others disrupted routines she once believed were permanent and necessary. Each decision tested her tolerance for uncertainty and self-trust. She resisted the urge to seek reassurance after acting. Validation delayed intentionally lost its grip on her confidence. Progress felt uneven, marked by doubt as much as determination. But even setbacks carried a new quality of ownership. Mistakes no longer confirmed her inadequacy, only her humanity. That reframing reduced fear enough to keep moving forward. Work and relationships were approached with new boundaries, imperfect but intentional. She declined obligations that demanded sacrifice without respect. Saying no still felt unnatural, but no longer impossible. She noticed how some people reacted poorly to her limits. Their discomfort clarified dynamics she once tried to excuse. Not everyone welcomed her growth, and she stopped trying to soften it. Distance replaced explanations where understanding was never sought. Energy once spent proving herself was redirected inward. Her sense of agency strengthened through repeated, consistent choices. Life slowly shifted from reaction to participation. The absence of her family's approval lingered, but its power diminished. Their opinions surfaced less frequently in her inner dialogue. When they did, she questioned their relevance instead of accepting them. She grieved what never existed rather than chasing it indefinitely. That grief was honest, allowing release without bitterness. Letting go did not require confrontation, only clarity. She stopped measuring progress against their expectations. Her identity expanded beyond the roles she had been assigned. Autonomy became tangible through lived experience, not affirmation. Transformation settled in quietly, reshaping her from the inside out. She noticed how different life felt when decisions no longer needed approval to exist. Time seemed to slow, not because problems vanished, but because panic no longer led. She developed routines that reflected care rather than endurance. Rest stopped feeling like something she had to justify afterward. Her body responded first, releasing tension she did not realize it carried. Sleep deepened, thoughts clarified, and emotional reactions softened gradually. Stability emerged not from certainty, but from consistency she created herself. Trust in her own judgment replaced the constant scanning for external signals. This internal alignment made daily life feel quieter, more navigable. For the first time, peace felt earned rather than borrowed. As she grew more grounded, opportunities appeared that once felt unreachable. She evaluated them slowly, without urgency or desperation. Choice became deliberate, guided by alignment instead of fear. Walking away felt as valid as committing, which changed everything. She noticed how confidence altered the way others interacted with her. Respect replaced tolerance in spaces where she once overextended. Her presence no longer sought permission, and that shift was visible. She stopped over-explaining herself, trusting clarity over persuasion. Misunderstandings decreased when she spoke from certainty rather than defense. Life began responding differently as she changed how she engaged with it. Contact with her family remained distant, but no longer destabilizing. She no longer waited for warmth that had never been offered freely. Conversations stayed brief, neutral, stripped of emotional expectation. She accepted their limitations without personalizing them. What once felt like rejection now felt like information. She understood that some people cannot meet needs they never learned to recognize. This realization brought relief rather than bitterness. She stopped assigning meaning to silence that no longer defined her. The emotional hold loosened with each interaction that lacked consequence. Detachment arrived not as coldness, but as clarity. The transformation completed itself not through achievement, but through acceptance. She accepted her past without allowing it to dictate her future. She accepted solitude without equating it to abandonment. She accepted strength without using it to excuse others' absence. Her sense of self no longer required validation to remain intact. She moved forward without the need to prove survival. What once broke her now informed her boundaries. What once silenced her now shaped her voice. She was no longer rebuilding from loss, but building from understanding. And with that, the transformation became irreversible. Time created distance that no explanation ever could. Months passed without conflict, confrontation, or dramatic closure. Her life expanded quietly while the past remained exactly where it was. She built stability that did not depend on reconciliation or approval. Success arrived gradually, not as spectacle, but as sustained peace. She no longer measured progress by who noticed or acknowledged it. Fulfillment came from alignment, not recognition from familiar faces. The absence that once hurt now felt irrelevant to her daily reality. She realized that healing did not require participation from those who caused the wound. Justice began forming through continuity rather than confrontation. Eventually, her family noticed the distance had shifted direction. She was no longer waiting to be included or understood. Their attempts at reconnection came cautiously, framed as concern or nostalgia. The tone had changed, softer now that control was no longer possible. She listened without reacting, aware of the timing rather than the words. There was no anger left to express, only boundaries to maintain. She responded politely, without reopening emotional access. What once would have triggered hope now felt neutral. She understood that timing often reveals intention more clearly than language, and she chose consistency over familiarity without hesitation. There was no need to explain her absence or justify her choices. Her life spoke for itself through calm, stability, and self-respect. She did not return to correct narratives or seek understanding. Some chapters close without mutual agreement, and that was acceptable. She recognized that survival does not create lifelong obligation. Gratitude does not require proximity, nor does growth require permission. She had already paid the cost of endurance in full. Anything beyond that was voluntary, not owed. This clarity removed the last trace of guilt she carried. Justice arrived through self-loyalty rather than vindication. Walking forward, she carried no desire to punish or impress. Leaving was not an act of revenge, but of completion. She honored what shaped her without allowing it to follow her. Her future was no longer framed by what she escaped. It was defined by what she chose to build intentionally. Family became a concept she redefined through actions, not blood. Connection was invited, not endured. Love was measured by presence, not obligation. She did not look back to confirm closure. The life she created made the ending undeniable. The final sense of justice did not come from resolution, but from permanence. Her new life no longer felt fragile or dependent on continued strength. It held even on difficult days, even when memories resurfaced unexpectedly. Nothing about her stability required revisiting old dynamics for reinforcement. She trusted herself enough to let the past exist without explanation. What once demanded constant emotional labor now required none. Distance had done its work more effectively than confrontation ever could. The separation was no longer something she maintained consciously. It had become the natural shape of her life. That quiet permanence confirmed the fairness of her outcome. She noticed how rarely her thoughts returned to old wounds. When they did, they appeared without urgency or emotional charge. Reflection replaced rumination, understanding replaced resentment. She could see her younger self with compassion instead of judgment. That internal reconciliation mattered more than external acknowledgement. The pain had not been wasted or minimized by time. It had been integrated into a clearer sense of self. What once defined her vulnerability now strengthened her discernment. Memory remained, but control was gone. This internal closure carried a calm that felt complete. Her definition of family evolved beyond expectation or obligation. She chose relationships that mirrored respect, presence, and reciprocity. Connection was built intentionally, not inherited by default. People earned closeness through consistency rather than history. This choice brought depth without confusion or hidden contracts. Love no longer required endurance or self-erasure. It existed where effort moved in both directions. She allowed herself to receive without suspicion. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, on new terms she defined. That freedom became one of her greatest achievements. Looking ahead, she no longer framed her future as recovery. She was not repairing damage, but expanding possibility. Her past had shaped her without imprisoning her. She carried clarity rather than caution into what came next. Nothing needed to be proven to anyone who stayed behind. Her growth did not require witnesses from former chapters. The life she lived was coherent, intentional, and fully hers. Leaving had not erased her history, only its authority. She moved forward without carrying unfinished conversations. And that quiet forward motion was the truest form of justice.